Hey everybody, and welcome back to Reason and Theology. Someone just sent me a clip by the Eastern Orthodox apologist Jay Dyer. In it, Jay claims that the popes have contradicted each other in their magisterium. Now why? What is his argument? Because according to him, medieval and modern popes have said conflicting things about Islam. Some popes, he says, have affirmed that the God of Islam is the God of the Bible, while others, specifically Pope Urban II, allegedly said that Muslims worship demons. And since my doctoral dissertation happens to be about magisterial reversals, I figured, okay, I'll bite. What does he have? Jay cites a speech from Pope Urban II in 1095 when he called the First Crusade. Now here's the quote. "All who die by the way, whether by land or by sea, or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. This I grant them through the power of God, which I am invested. Oh, what a disgrace if such a despised and base race, which worships demons, should conquer a people which has the faith of omnipotent God." So the question is this: does this actually contradict the magisterium or later popes, and even Vatican II, which teaches that Catholics and Muslims worship the same God? Now that's Jay's claim, but does it work? First, let's point out the obvious. This quote is just one of 5 different, and even in some cases, conflicting accounts of what Pope Urban II actually said at the Council of Clermont. And in fact, the very source that Jay refers everyone to openly admits this. The source says, "The acts of the council have not been preserved, but we have 5 accounts of the speech of Urban, which were written by men who were present and heard him." But here's the thing. Those 5 accounts don't all say the same thing, and sometimes they contradict each other. And this quote, the one about a base race which worships demons, only appears in one of the 5 accounts. None of the others mention it. That one account comes from Fulcher of Chartres, but Fulcher didn't even start writing it down until years after the speech. So the question becomes, when he finally put pen to paper, was he recalling it from memory? Was he using another source? We honestly don't know. And to make matters more complicated, his original version of what he wrote down doesn't even seem to exist anymore. What we have today is a later version of that account. So if you're banking on this being something that Pope Urban II definitely and definitively said, that's a pretty shaky foundation. But let's say for the sake of argument that Pope Urban II actually said this. That still raises the more important question: is this an act of the papal magisterium? What gives Jay the impression that this is a magisterial act of a pope? More specifically, what gives him the impression that this part of the speech is a doctrinal teaching that the pope is proposing to the faithful rather than his personal opinion? Look, it's actually pretty common for popes to share personal opinions, even within official documents, even at local councils, and without them intending to bind the faithful to believe them. That's one of the key distinctions I walk students through in my courses on the magisterium. And Jay might say, but look, this took place at a local council in France. Look, I'll do one better. What about at an ecumenical council? Take, for example, Vatican II. Pope John the 23rd and Paul VI made many speeches at Vatican II, but they were not magisterial acts of the Pope. They're only preserved in the Acts of Vatican II, and they're technically speaking not magisterial in nature. They're helpful to understand the magisterium and understand Vatican II, but strictly speaking, no religious submission of intellect and will is owed to those speeches of the popes at an ecumenical council. How much less would assent be needed for a speech of a pope at a local council in France? So if Jay is going to treat this as a contradiction in doctrine, he's got to do a few things. Number 1, demonstrate that this account is historically reliable, even though the other accounts don't include it. And number 2, prove that it is a magisterial act, and not just the Pope's personal rhetoric in a speech. And then number 3, show that this statement was proposed as doctrine, not just as wartime opinion of a Pope. And even in worst case scenario, if this was a magisterial statement, and even if the statement was intended to be a doctrinal claim, what's the problem? That would just mean that a non-definitive or non-infallible teaching of one Pope is in conflict with another non-infallible or non-definitive teaching of another pope or another council. Within the Catholic framework, that's actually conceivable. Both popes and ecumenical councils can teach either definitively or non-definitively. That doesn't violate the Church's teaching on indefectibility or infallibility, because neither of those doctrines claim that every statement made from the Pope is free from error. In fact, in the Profession of Faith promulgated by Pope John Paul II in 1989, the concluding 3 paragraphs, in the very last paragraph, it describes non-definitive teachings of the Pope, teachings that are not irreformable in nature, and not only of the Pope, but also of the College of Bishops. So again, what's the big deal here? The Church doesn't fall apart under this scenario. The Catholic paradigm still stands. Even if Catholicism is false, Jay still hasn't falsified its own claims on its own terms. So it's hard to see why Jay thinks this is a gotcha moment. Honestly, I suspect Jay hasn't really thought through this. In fact, I know he hasn't, and I've been pointing this out for years. Jay has displayed a profound ignorance of the magisterium for a very long time. Even the first time he came on my channel, right here on Reason and Theology, it was clear that even as a former Catholic, Jay really didn't understand how the magisterium works. And after all these years, it doesn't seem like he's changed. But here's the bigger lesson for everyone watching. We need to be asking deeper questions when someone throws out a quote from a pope or a council, and when they say, "See, here's a contradiction." We also need to do the same with the Bible. But speaking here just about the magisterium, are we asking questions like this? What's the source of this quote? Do we have reliable manuscripts for this quote? Do those manuscripts conflict with other accounts? Could this be a textual corruption? Is this a magisterial act? If this is magisterial, is it reformable or irreformable? These are the kind of questions we have to ask. Because if we're not asking those questions, we're not actually doing the work. We're just reacting, and that's not how you get to the truth. So thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and like this video if you found it beneficial, and also let me know your thoughts about it in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you.